welcome to Master Phil in your corner. And in this episode, we're going to have multiple-time black belt IBJJF champion Kyle Farrison. Kyle is also a law enforcement agent, and we're going to be discussing the use or lack of use of martial arts with law enforcement officers and how we can address that. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Phil. Obviously, we've known each other for several years now, and the fact that I can partake in this and give some expertise, regarding crossing the lines of Jiu Jitsu and law enforcement. I think that the podcast today is going to be eye opening. It may hurt some people's feelings, but the truth is the truth, and we're going to try to get to the bottom of the truth today. And when we do at the end of the podcast, a lot of people will probably run towards us, and we'll have some people that run away from us.
Well, is that anything new, Kyle?
Absolutely
okay.
not. Nope.
One of the things that has always befuddled me, and again, I was a DCJ instructor for 5 years in New Jersey, teaching at the academy, is that these law enforcement officers would go through their 6 weeks of hand-to-hand training in the academy, and then never do it again. They would just not move forward. And it's always been my contention that, okay, great, you learned this stuff, but in order to use it, you have to develop what I call IT, or instinctive technique, and you have to practice it.
Sure.
Can we just expand on that a little bit? And first we'll identify this as an issue, and then we'll say, well, why is this happening?
Well, every department has its own use of force continuum. And, my 7 years in the sheriff's department, the use of force continuum module has changed over that 7 years.
Yes.
It used to be linear in terms of what force would be used given a circumstance. Now it's more of a circular model, meaning that you can flow in and around and go back to. It's not a step by step process.
So for the people who don't really grasp that, linear, you are referring to escalation of force,
right?
And then circular, they're saying, well, you know what? Okay, this guy's complying, so I have to pull down my force, or this guy ramps it up, so I have to ramp up my force.
Right. So I think in law enforcement, any law enforcement officer that's watching this particular podcast knows that, first and foremost, your interpersonal skills are going to be necessary to either de-escalate a situation, and that's really the best tool that you're going to have is your ability to talk to people, talk to the community. And, that right there, if you have that and that's a mastered skill, there's very rarely an incident, that I've seen that, if you can contact and you can connect with somebody, you can probably diffuse most situations.
Yeah, it's funny because I found that also when I was in my bouncing days. You'd have somebody who's a rowdy in the bar, and when you say to him, hey, you're a good guy, aren't you? Okay. And even if the guy's the biggest jerk on the planet, he says, well, I'm a good guy. And you just diffuse it instead of coming into him, putting your chest out and start pushing him around. You want to diffuse the situation. That's one of the things also that's going to lead us into what type of defensive tactics we should be using. But I really want to delve into this because what percentage of people, of law enforcement officers actually practice martial arts on a regular basis? And let's compare that with them pushing weights at the gym or even using their firearm.
I can't give you an exact figure on that. I mean, what I can touch on is that you're 100% correct in terms of, you go through retraining and you go through those things, one time a year. And really the jiu-jitsu component and the self-defense component, that's taught in the academy. I mean, this is going to be one of those areas right here that may rub people the wrong way. From what I've seen and, from, going through the academy myself, they're really not interested in teaching you moves and techniques that are meant to save you. They're really interested in teaching you techniques that will prevent a lawsuit against them.
Yeah.
And, that's problematic because, you really have to, consider, are these moves going to work to help me get home to my family? Or are they only being taught for the sole purpose of saying to a defense attorney, well, we gave them this information and they used it. Yeah, but that's just to clear you from a lawsuit possibility.
You see, here's the thing that I have a huge issue with. The thing is that, it's important that the officer goes home at the end of the day.
100%.
And if they are being taught techniques that are not going to work, what's the point? Just they're just worried about a lawsuit now, and who is writing these rules? Is someone who has field experience like yourself writing these rules, or are they written by someone sitting up in an ivory tower somewhere, coming down with this information and handing out these edicts and saying, well, this is the way it needs to be? But it's a lot different when you're sitting there in the armchair and
Sure.
when you're out there on the mat or in the ring or in the street with someone that you're trying to control, spitting on you, kicking you, trying to stick a shiv in your gut.
Well, you know what? I mean, techniques are techniques, and any person can go on YouTube and look at a technique and probably figure out how to do it. Where it comes into the importance for law enforcement is in law enforcement, you're forced to make split second decisions with several physiological responses happening, and you have to be able to control those physiological responses, meaning your vision gets, more narrow, your heart rate is up, you probably will shake a little bit. And if you don't have control of those faculties with your own body, then you're probably going to clam up and freeze. And it doesn't matter what technique if you can't control your own body and your own thought process and your own vision, to relax and to make sound, decisions, the technique's not going to save you.
It's really funny. You touch on a couple of really hot points that most people have no concept of, none. And I discussed them in one of my books, Survival Strong. I call it the whir. And I know you know what I'm talking about because you've been in battle, you've been in the combat. You have this whir, you get tunnel vision, your heart rate's up, the adrenaline's pumping, and sometimes you seem like everything's going in slow motion, or maybe you feel weak or something, and you have to make a decision.
Sure.
And if you're not used to putting yourself in those positions, your body and mind are not conditioned to respond properly. So what's going to happen? You're going to freeze, okay? And back in the day, in psychology, we would talk about the flight or fight syndrome, and they never brought up the freeze. And I'll tell you what, 20 years ago, I came up with, I'm sure somebody else came up with it too, but I said, I call it the 3 Fs, and I cover them in my book as well as my seminars: fight, flight, or freeze. And most people freeze like a deer in the headlights. The first time somebody gets cracked in the nose, oh my God, I've been hit. And how they're going to respond to that is life-saving. It can save their lives and the lives of the people that they're trying to protect. And it can also have them think clearly in the situation because they're used to it. Man, how many times have you been cracked in the nose?
Quite a few. I mean, my nose is broken right now.
Yeah.
But Phil, to touch on that as well, let's stay on the same topic, but I'm just going to take the use of force continuum to the next phase, the final phase, which is the firearms. So every year we're forced to requalify in the gun range, and it involves, a series of shots in a certain period of time, to requalify.
It's like 60 shots.
Yeah, you have to get 8 shots off in 8 seconds, and you have to, get 6 shots off, reload, another 6 shots off. But here's what's missing. Someone's not shooting back at you.
There you go.
It's a non-moving target. Your heart rate isn't up. So you're not shooting, a paper target under any type of stress whatsoever beside a stopwatch. And the reason why I believe, if you take a look at the numbers from the FBI Academy, and you take a look at in a 10-round shot for police officers, how many bullets actually miss target. Well, the simple reason is because you can't train somebody, on the gun range to have someone shooting back at you. You can't train someone, to go through all those physiological responses that happen, when you're in a gun battle, so it's very hard to quantify how a human is going to respond, in a live scenario when they're not being given that training to put them in the live scenario.
Again, I'm going to go back to what the media portrays too, is that the rules and so forth and how you're being judged. You're being judged by people who don't have any experience. So they say, oh gosh, why'd the cop unload his clip? Well, he hit 3 times out of 15, okay? Because you have a moving target. You have someone shooting back at you. There's duress. You're trying to have cover and fire off rounds. I mean, unless you've been in that situation or have some sort of appreciation for that, why are you writing laws or passing judgment on it? You have no business doing it.
Because unfortunately, we live in a society where it's very easy to Monday morning quarterback. And I can't even tell you what it's like to have someone shoot back at me. So I can't even tell you how I would respond in a scenario like that. What I can tell you, though, is through jiu-jitsu, I know full well what it's like to be attacked.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that feeling and that physiological response that happens when you're attacked, from the live training, that martial arts has provided.
And, and that's the thing that has to be brought up, too, because, you've been in law enforcement a number of years. And as in many people, especially in this area in law enforcement, you never draw your gun. Okay?
Sure.
There are guys who go through a 20, 25-year career, never drawing their gun once. But let me tell you something. They are putting their hands on people all the time. They're at physical confrontations where they have to grab somebody, where they're being grabbed all the time on a regular basis. I do not understand why every law enforcement officer is not training, or why it's not an edict for them to be training in martial arts. I mean, first of all, get you prepared to be able to handle yourself. And there's nothing like man-to-man strength. You can lift weights all you want. Yeah. You can do all the Pilates, whatever you're going to do. Okay, all you want. But you know what? Man-to-man strength is where it's at. Shifting someone's weight. I mean, unless you're doing jiu-jitsu or wrestling or something, you have no idea how to do that. And the other thing is you have to be able to strike and avoid strikes. So if you're doing like boxing, kickboxing, something like that, that's going to help you out dramatically. And the other thing is that talking about different types of martial arts that you can get yourself involved in. Obviously, I know you're a big advocate of jiu-jitsu, and with good reason. But not everybody does jiu-jitsu like you or advocate like I do. But what are some of the other arts you think?
Well, I tell you this, and I know that, because we recently went through our our self-defense refresher last year, I believe in February. And the DCJS for New York State has really shifted towards ground fighting and jiu-jitsu. And I think that that's important. And I get questions from my students, and I also get questions from other fellow officers. What is the best martial art for law enforcement? And, my personal opinion, and this is just my opinion, the striking sports, you run the risk of fatally injuring someone. And the strike may not have been intended to kill someone, but anytime you strike another person, you run that risk. And let's face it, we also live in a society where, we see police videos and, we see, civilians and innocent bystanders walking by, filming on their iPhones and things of this nature. It just never looks good to be striking somebody. Yeah. Okay. It just doesn't look good. I think it sends a different message to the public that jiu-jitsu, could potentially give. And I truly believe that once you understand jiu-jitsu and once you know it at a certain level, you should and could be able to subdue anyone without too much force, without risk of injury. Obviously, in New York State, you cannot use any chokes whatsoever, and that's important to know.
Important to know.
But I have used several arm locks and several locks, associated with jiu-jitsu, to bring someone, to a point of being able to be handcuffed and have diffused the situation, and nobody's ever gotten hurt.
Yeah, well, because, the funny thing is that you bring that up, handcuffing. People seem to forget that, you have to bring someone to the ground and handcuff them. There's no way, in my opinion, there's no way that a law enforcement officer should not have some basis of wrestling, jiu-jitsu, something that you have to know grappling. The only thing is I'm just talking about maybe not on the side of using strikes, but avoiding strikes. And the best way to do that, if you know how to box and shift and move out of the way, or have your hands up the right way and parry a block or something to get a parry strike and block to get inside someone to use your jiu-jitsu. Because what I've always abided by the rule is that you have to earn the right to use jiu-jitsu.
Sure.
And look, you and I know how tough it is to control somebody that doesn't want to be controlled. Try getting
especially under the influence of drugs or alcohol or something of that nature. That changes the game.
That's a whole game changer.
It changes the game.
They don't feel pain. So all these like pressure point, George Dillman, it's not going to work.
No, it's not. It's not going to work.
Okay, Kyle, if you're mad and someone goes and puts a little pressure point on you, is that going to bother you?
No.
Right.
But in all use of force modules too, you have your OC sprays and your pepper sprays, and there are people that are immune to that.
Oh yeah. Well, and what about what the guys do in the prison when they smear themselves with feces and vomit? The OC sprays don't work.
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't permeate.
Absolutely. I mean,
try to grab somebody covered in feces and urine and vomit.
Law enforcement officers try to always stay ahead of the game, and I think that every law enforcement officer, listening here knows that you're forced to make sound decisions and judgment calls every single day, and whether or not you're on the road, whether or not you're in a correctional facility, you get to learn and you get to read body language. You get to assess and monitor conversations, and that comes with experience. And like I said, I'm a firm believer in, most of your scenarios, if you have proper interpersonal skills, you should be able to diffuse the situation. Yes. But there are times where, no matter what you do as a law enforcement officer, you have no choice but to go hands-on. And I'm pretty sure just about every agency in America, the very last resort is the weapon.
Yes.
Is the gun.
Yes.
And we talked about this briefly on the way down here. Most of the guys that I know that are police officers, spend countless and countless hours on the gun range practicing firearms, and it's great. And most of the guys that I know actually love, marksmanship, and they're really involved and they really enjoy it. But let's face it, no police officer ever wants to take that gun out of their holster and shoot someone, right? For several reasons. And then once you get out of the main cities and the suburban areas, most people going through a 20-year career maybe will take their gun out of their holster a few times, maybe a handful of times, but that same officer will be forced to go hands-on and use some sort of defensive tactics on a daily or weekly basis during the course of their 20-year career. And I don't see a lot of law enforcement officers really taking the time and the effort and expending the same amount of time and effort in practicing a martial art as they do marksmanship.
Now, why do you think that is? I have my own theories because I've had a martial arts school for over 30 years, and I was an instructor in the DCJ and so forth. I have my own theories, but you know what? Let's.
My personal opinion is this: when guys are on the job and they're on the clock, they can utilize some of their time to go to the range and shoot while they're on the clock because it is a part of their work-related functions. Mm-hmm. For you to commit to a jiu-jitsu program or martial arts school, that's something that you have to do on your own time. It's something that will probably cost you extra money. Let's face it, guys and women have families and other things going on in life, so it's going to take an outside commitment for anyone, not just law enforcement officers, to commit and want to dedicate time to that particular sport. So I don't really know. I just know that a lot of what I see in law enforcement involves wanting to master and get used and get ready to use the gun. But let's face it, I don't think there's any law enforcement officer that takes the oath of office that says, "I can't wait to shoot someone."
Right.
I don't say it. I don't believe it to be true. But I do know that most of your law enforcement officers, actually all of them, do want to go home every night to their families. They do want to put their children to sleep. They do want to kiss their wives before they go to sleep. And, I've always said, why not practice something that you're going to use on a daily basis, with going hands-on? And it's a lot easier to articulate a report regarding why you used this hands-on procedure as opposed to why you drew your weapon. And now it takes it to a completely different realm of use of force.
Yeah, you can't take a bullet back.
No.
Once that leaves the gun, that's it. And that intended target, if you strike it, man, that's it.
Yeah, and you know what? Even in jail, because I work in corrections, I've dealt with several people that have murdered other individuals, and just the other day I was talking to someone and I looked at him and I said, "I bet you wish that if you could take that bullet back and change the course of how that individual died, you would probably go back to that scene, you'd probably go back to that moment, and you would probably think and do things different than how it turned out." And unfortunately, that was a young man that's, I believe, only 19 years old. Wow. But those are the stories that you hear. Mm-hmm. Those are the stories that you hear. And you made a great point. Once you release that bullet and squeeze the trigger, there's no taking it back. Whereas, jiu-jitsu and a martial art will give you the ability to at least take someone to the ground,
Yep.
at least, subdue them. And, hopefully the outcome is nonviolent. Both people have a second opportunity in life, through the incarceration, getting their lives together. The officer gets to go home to his family and wife, so it's just a better way.
The perp gets their day in court.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just a better way.
Yep, exactly. That also brings you to, well, what type of martial arts? When you look on the internet and you say, well, what type of martial arts should a law enforcement officer use? And look, the one that keeps cropping up is Krav Maga. Now, I think Krav Maga is a great form of self-defense. It's a great form of combat for soldiers.
Sure.
But guess what? You're not soldiers in the street. You can't go and eye gouge someone, pull someone's throat out, snap someone's knee when you're trying to subdue them.
Sure.
This is going to create the wrong type of instinctive or IT technique in an officer. My opinion on that. What is yours on that?
My opinion on the Krav Maga is, we get asked this question all the time as school owners and martial artists, Phil. People always want to know, what's the best martial art for taking on several individuals at once? And I don't think there is one.
I say run.
Yeah, that's actually great. Run and pray. And don't run in a straight line, because if they have a gun, it's an easier shot. But I have students ask me all the time about Krav Maga, and I've never done it myself, so I can't speak from doing it myself. What I have done is I've watched it on YouTube, and it looks like a form of choreographed fighting against several different people. And the problem that I see with it is that a lot of the strikes are done to the groin and to the throat, and like you said, the eye gouging. And, if you're in law enforcement and you ever have to articulate a report, it's going to be awfully difficult to articulate a report where you're on camera, punching someone in the private parts or chopping their throat or eye gouging them. So that, to me, excuse me, when I look at the martial art and my experience with articulating, reports for incidents, I'm looking at every move and every course of action that I take. I'm going to have a day in court where I have to explain to a defense attorney, to a judge, possibly to a jury, why did I go about that procedure? Did that procedure fall in line with, my SOP and use of force? And I don't think there's any use of force module where it calls for kicking somebody in the groin or, punching someone in the throat. Granted, I guess if it came down to someone's coming home or someone's going home and someone's not, all bets are off and it's a street fight at that point. But again, I'm going to stick by it. There's a better way.
Yes.
There's a better way than using the gun. There's a better way than having to hit somebody with an expandable baton. There's a better way than, actually maybe not. The taser, I've seen the taser work, for folks that are out of line, drinking, drugs, things of that nature. I think that,
but that's not lethal.
But I think that every tool on a duty belt is meant for a reason. Right. So a law enforcement officer goes out into the field and he has several tools available to him or her, and all of those tools, that officer has to make split the second decisions as to what tool they're going to use at what point of an incident. And then they're going to have to be justified and justify themselves as to why they use that particular tool.
It's funny because, people ask me the same question. What's the best self-defense to use or best martial art for self-defense? Well, it depends on the situation, because you can be great at jiu-jitsu, but if you take someone to the ground and he's got 5 friends, you know what? Who's going to win? The guy with the most friends, because you're going to get kicked and stomped.
Yep.
I know, I've been there. So, but then you say, well, gosh, what about boxing or kickboxing or Krav Maga or something? Okay, great. For standing, it's a defensive tactic situation, but that does not necessarily translate to you being able to apprehend a suspect, because yes, you do have to defend yourself, but you have to know some type of grappling. Remember what the goal is of a law enforcement officer. It's to quell and subdue
and control.
And you're not going to. The only way to control someone with strikes is by knocking them out.
Agreed.
Control.
So if I had to take a strong stance right here, which, may get some critique from, the live viewers, I do believe, and I'm speaking now out of experience, that your best bet with martial arts regarding law enforcement is going to be jiu-jitsu and grappling, wrestling background. And that is because you can take people to the ground and, you can gain control of the situation without hurting the individual. And,
minimize it.
you can apply as much force necessary to a jiu-jitsu submission without injuring the person, but you can also get your point across as well.
Yes.
And I've used those, and I speak out of experience right now, where I've had to take people down and I've had to apply, manipulate certain arm locks and wrist locks and things of that nature. And while you're doing those things, you are also giving that assailant orders to stop resisting. And when you become a good practitioner in the art, you learn how to control yourself. You learn how to control the submission and the movement, and you can still utilize your interpersonal skills to let the person know that you are now in control, and I am applying force, as much force as necessary. And once you stop resisting, the force will begin to subside as well.
It's funny you bring that up because you remember I relayed a story that happened to me a couple of years ago when it happened to a big guy, very big, strong guy who was trained. I knew him, and he attacked me. I mean, he had me by about 40 pounds or so. Tried to grab me and throw me to the ground. Mistake. I hip tossed him, and I put him in a key lock. What we call Americana now.
Yeah, yep.
I put him in a key lock, and I could have snapped his arm, and I put him right to the edge where he could feel his arm was going to snap. He felt it was going to snap, and I quelled the situation. Now, would it have been justified in pounding his face into the ground? Yeah, I probably could have got away with it, but guess what? I'd have been in court. I probably would have got arrested.
Sure.
Probably would have had to hire an attorney. But you know what? As opposed to using the strike, I did strike him once. I punched him in the stomach.
You would have had to explain everything that happened in that scenario at some point.
At some point. Whereas I only hit him in the stomach, threw him, and got him in the lock. And I quelled the situation.
Yep.
And then I moved him on.
And Phil, you made a valid point earlier too when you said, you can't take a bullet back. In the same respect, you cannot take a strike back either.
Nope.
Because once you strike someone and you hit them, you can't take that back.
Well, the other thing is too is that people don't realize that many times when someone dies from being punched, they don't die from the punch; they die from the fall. I know a guy who got in a bar fight, spent 8 years in prison. He punched a guy in the face. The guy fell, hit his head on the rail on the bar, and died. So he got a manslaughter charge. He just got in a stupid bar fight.
Yeah.
And now his life was gone. He spent 8 years in prison for that. So if it was a jiu-jitsu situation, maybe he would have done an arm drag, got him from behind, heel tripped him, and put him in a choke or something, and went home at the end of the night and not been spending 8 years in the pokey.
Yeah, no, and listen, I can speak from firsthand experience, and listen, because I work in a correctional setting, there are cameras everywhere.
Everywhere.
Right? There are cameras everywhere. And I think that every law enforcement officer, we've gone into a world of body cams now.
Yes.
Everybody's walking around with cell phones. And for myself in particular, the jail is filled with cameras because, the correction division has changed drastically in terms of the approach to corrections. And so when you know that you are on camera, you have to conduct yourself, okay? Because you have to conduct yourself in a manner that you can explain, right? And losing your cool and losing your calmness and saying things, that you don't want other people to hear, that's all going to come back at some point.
Yeah, that also harkens to another point. Remember, no matter what, cooler heads prevail.
Yeah.
And if you're used to being in the fracas, if you're used to training and fighting and sparring and so forth, and you're able to keep your cool when things go awry, because things will go awry.
Yeah.
And here's my other bone of contention with people who do like those pure self-defense aspects, and they say, "Oh no, sport." Well, you know what though? You need to know both. Why? I go back to the man-to-man strength. I'll go back to having to manipulate someone else's weight.
This is a great point, right?
I'll go back to, when someone punches, how to roll with a punch you're getting hit, you're taking someone down, you're pushing, you're pulling, they're pushing into you. You have to take them down. You have to move their weight. If you're just doing a self-defense art where they're hitting pads or just practicing scenario or
punching air.
Yeah, punching air, choreographed techniques, so forth, and they're not doing the man-to-man. They're not feeling how someone's body reacts when a punch is thrown or a kick is thrown or a choke is trying to be applied or a grab is occurring. If you're not used to that, there's no way that you're going to be able to respond to that properly when it happens for real.
This is a great point, and we've also discussed this too, Phil. Our schools and how we do things, being you and me, we allow certain things to happen in our school that other places may not allow, right? And I tell my students, that all come into me. There are certain things that I'm going to allow happen at my school that you may not see at another school. For instance, a forearm coming across the jaw, that to me is not dirty jiu-jitsu, okay? That to me is called a frame. And if you are practicing and you are going to a school that preaches self-defense, well, you're doing your students a disservice by not allowing certain things to happen out of fear that they're going to walk out and take their money and go to another school. The way I view my school is I never want one of my students to ever come back to me and say to me, well, what you taught me didn't work.
Right.
And that's why I allow certain things. Now, the punching, the kicking, the intentional grabbing of private parts, that stuff is dirty to me. But a forearm across the face, okay, is going to happen. And it's going to happen in a street fight too. Yeah. And it's going to happen in a law enforcement altercation. Yep. Those things are going to happen. And the more realistic you can make your training in your school and your program, the better off that you're going to have a chance of survival when it actually does happen in the street.
Absolutely, 100%. So the thing is that when you're a law enforcement officer, I mean, to me, anyone, but especially a law enforcement officer, you have to be involved in a martial art that's being taught in a fashion that allows for the roughness to go on.
Sure.
Because you got to condition your body. You're not just all of a sudden going to be, doing your kicks in the air or throws on a dummy and then know how to handle when someone cracks you in the face.
Yeah.
What to do. You're going to have that contact. You're going to have to feel how the body reacts. And if you're not in a school that's doing that, you're
actually doing your students a disservice by, 100%. by selling a bill of sales that's literally BS.
Oh yeah.
I tell my police, and I have quite a few police officers come to me, for my jiu-jitsu, and I tell them all the time, I don't ever want to hear your family call me and say, what you taught my son or daughter didn't work when the time happened, and now they're no longer alive. I never want that phone call. No. I would rather other people talk about my school and say it's too rough and too hardcore, but at least I know my students at the end of the day are going to come home.
Yes. And I know you treat your wrestling crew the same way, because I see these guys, these young hammers coming up wrestling. Kyle also has a jiu-jitsu school, but he's got a very huge wrestling following, and he's just building a great reputation. And they're hammers. Why? Because it's the training that they're going through. They're not taking the easy way out. They're not taking the easy road. If it were easy, everyone would do it. If you look at like the small percentage of people that do martial arts, and then the small percentage that do real martial arts, and the small percentage that wrestle, it's very small. It's an elite group, and there's reasons for that.
And you know what, Phil? Like when I do my marketing schemes, I don't market fitness, and I don't market weight loss, and I don't market anything that is meant to be BS to the consumer. Mm-hmm. Because I know that should you train jiu-jitsu the right way, the weight loss is going to happen.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen regardless. But I don't ever want my school to be known as a school of the next fad in fitness, right? I want my jiu-jitsu school and wrestling academies to be known as a place where you're going to go and you're going to get the reality of what could potentially happen.
Yep. And that's all we like. That's all we're here to do.
That's it.
To tell them the truth, to talk from experience. And look, I know you have incredible experience on the mat and in real life. And I know my experiences are pretty deep and wide as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And anything that we're going to teach people, we either did it ourselves or we saw somebody do it and it worked. And if it's not going to work, I put it in a bowl, throw it out the window, and I know you do the same thing.
Sure.
That's why we focus on what we focus on.
Well, and I think that yours and mine teaching curriculum is really designed on practical experience, because both you and I have been in the thick. We've walked into the fire. We've never walked away from it. So there are things that I teach my students in the Jiu Jitsu program that I know work.
Yes.
From firsthand experience, and I try to steer away from teaching my students something that I haven't done, because I think that takes away the reality of it, because I'm not sure, and I can't say without a shadow of a doubt, it's going to work should you have to use it.
Yeah. And that's also tantamount to your style and your success.
Yeah.
Truthfulness. And, sometimes people don't want to hear the truth and they're afraid of it. And this is one thing I find a big problem, and I'm going to go out there and say it with a lot of law enforcement agents. They don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to face the truth. But I'll tell you what, when you have somebody on top of you grabbing for your gun, and you don't know how to sweep them because you never stepped on a jiu-jitsu mat or had never been in wrestling.
Or you're just so fatigued because you're in terrible shape.
I mean, you see so many of these people. I mean, I did a whole podcast on that, on the condition of law enforcement agents, officers, and so forth, and what's being put out there now. I mean, actually, they want our force to be less. They want our people to be weaker.
Sure.
So we're having law enforcement agents with a lower standard because of all these PC.
Well, I can tell you, this is also problematic too, and this is going to offend a lot of people, but the law enforcement guys that are watching this will 100% agree, and this is me taking, the side of law enforcement. Those that are making the new laws regarding how law enforcement should be done are those that have never walked a day or a mile in those shoes. And what's happened is that they have really tied, police officers' hands behind their backs.
Absolutely.
And have really nullified their ability to do the job, with any type of integrity or force.
And the thing is, you brought up a point about your demeanor and so forth. And I will tell you this, is that having confidence comes across. I know it comes across in your job.
Sure.
It comes across when I was doing security. And the reason we have the confidence is because of what we've done.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you're not used to facing situations, you're not used to that, you know what? You're not going to have that confidence.
Sure.
You can sit there and lift all the weight you want and do whatever else you want, but you don't have the confidence that you know that when this goes down, you're going to be on top.
I already know the outcome.
Exactly. So I know. So when I've been in situations, a lot of times situations don't occur just because of my confidence factor, because I step up into it. And then all of a sudden, oh, okay, this guy, why is this guy like this? I got this guy by 6 inches and 50 pounds.
Yep.
Why is he not in the least bit intimidated by me?
Yep. And that confidence is a big thing. And I see it with, even where I work, you can see the inmates will treat certain officers a certain way.
They smell it.
Because they can smell the weakness and the fear. Yep. And then you have your officers that have no fear, and that is also seen too. Yes. And that probably is going to make certain people out there cringe, but that's the truth. If you present yourself in a soft, weak, and scared approach, other people will see that, and then you become the prey.
They smell the blood.
Yep.
And one of the ways to avoid being put into the bloodbath like that and not having that confidence is through training, because training breeds confidence. I don't care what age it's at, whether you're a little kid or a full-grown adult. And if you look at some of the standards for police officers, I know that I talked about this on another podcast where the women have to do 24 push-ups in a minute.
Yeah.
24 push-ups in a minute. Okay, so what kind of confidence is that police officer going to have?
Phil, I actually have your answer right here to the whole summation of why we're doing this podcast. You asked me before, why are law enforcement officers, and it's not just law enforcement officers, it's people. Why do they not spend more time in a martial art or training? And the answer is pride.
Yes.
That is the answer. In jiu-jitsu, you will spend the first year of your jiu-jitsu career losing. Losing. You will walk into a room and lose every single day for an entire year.
Yep.
And if you don't have the mental capacity to be able to lose and come back and lose and come back, eventually you're going to walk out of the door with your tail between your legs, and you're going to make an excuse and find an excuse as to why you cannot come back. And so the answer is pride. And no law enforcement officer wants to come in. And I've seen it with my own school. I have a 13-year-old that does wrestling and jiu-jitsu, and I've put him against grown men and women that are law enforcement officers, and he controls them as a 13-year-old. That's a young 13-year-old trained individual able to control full-grown men and women that wear badges out in the street. Those people have stayed with me. There are people that have so much pride that they would look at that and find an excuse as to why they can't come back. And really what it comes down to is pride.
And it's funny that you bring that up too, because that's it. Because I know we've had this discussion before too. Both of us have very athletic backgrounds. And I'll tell you, when I first started doing jiu-jitsu, I got subbed left and right, triangle, armbar, heel, whatever it was.
Every day.
Every day. And I was pissed. Okay. But you know what? I came back the next day because I'm like, I am not going to allow this to happen to me. I will be the one doing this. And you know what? It took a good year.
Yeah. Your goals in jiu-jitsu as a brand new person, small goals. I'm not going to get tapped today by a triangle. I'm not going to get tapped today by an armbar. And those are the small battles that you need to win.
Yes.
That will eventually become the foundation of who you are in the jiu-jitsu program. Yep. But make no mistake, and I tell people this all the time, you will never start off in jiu-jitsu as the hammer.
Nope.
You will be the nail for a good 6 to 12 months before you even get to be a hammer.
Absolutely.
And most people cannot do that because there's a level of pride that comes with that.
But you know, it's really funny though. Take a step back, knowing that this 13-year-old kid could hammer you. Okay, wouldn't you something in the back of your mind say, "Hey, wait, if this is happening here, what could happen to me out there? Here, all I got to do is tap. Out there, I'm gonna die." That is huge.
I mean, I understand that point. However, the use of a weapon can give anybody a false sense of security.
Yep.
Right? Yep. So even as we sit here as gentlemen, I have my 40 cal right here on my waist. I would never bring that gun out ever unless I absolutely had to use it. Yep. If somebody else had a gun. Because other than that, it's going to be an all-out warfare dogfight. And unfortunately, I'm probably going to win.
Yeah. Unfortunately for them.
But if you have a gun pointed at me, I need to know that I have the tool to meet that force with force.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, we had some great points here today, and I want to thank Kyle Farrison for coming in.
I had a great time.
I know we didn't talk to Dougie Fresh that much here.
Yeah, Doug, do you have anything you want to interject in?
A lot of great points.
Yeah, as an outsider, someone who's not a martial artist or I
trained at your school back in the day.
I know, well, you're not current martial artist, but
True,
I mean, do you have any commentary on what you heard us espouse today?
First off, you definitely can tell a difference between what you guys do and the belt factories that we talked about in other podcasts. You can just tell. It's very surprising that law enforcement doesn't use these tactics or make them have at least like once a month training seminars where they're like at least getting basic grapples. That's just crazy to me. But yeah, I mean,
if you knew the amount of time spent on firearms and shooting at the range, if you knew the amount of time spent by law enforcement officers doing that particular art, and then took a look at the difference between that and how much time is spent in defensive tactics, you'd be appalled.
Yeah.
And don't take this the wrong way, but then what do you expect someone to do when all their training is in that and not?
It should be part of the curriculum. Should be part of the curriculum. hour once a week. Do some martial
have
arts,
someone
do
have
some
someone come
grappling,
and
do
train.
something.
Have and you can have someone come to the police department and train. I mean, make it part of the taxes. Like, I mean, we're paying crazy taxes anyway. Like, we can't get a couple trainers to come in once a month or once a week.
Or take an hour away from the.
Well, I'll
firearms
you know,
shooting.
our department in Rockland, the sheriff's department, you know, they do a pretty good job of providing us, you know, proper training year round. And I mean training in everything, you know, sexual harassment, you know, defensive tactics, you know, so our department actually does a pretty good job with that. But let's face it, man, like, it's civil service too. And there are people in civil service that flat out do not belong in civil service. And that's probably another thing that's going to make people cringe on Facebook right now. And that's okay, because civil service is just a test, right? And you could be completely unfit for a job, but as long as you score well on the test, you're going to probably get it. Right. And that's also a big divide right there, too.
Yes.
And, you know, I see that and I look around and, you know, let's face it. You need to have a certain level of intelligence to be a good law enforcement officer.
Yes.
Right. You need to have a certain level of being able to speak to people well and connect with the community, you know, but you also need to have a certain level of physical components, too. Right. You know, if you're 350 pounds sitting in a police car, I'm sorry, man. To me, you're just not cut out for it. You're just not cut out for it. And if you take a look, because I have a couple state troopers, those guys are in shape.
Right. Like Jersey State.
If you deal with federal guys, they're also in shape. Right? Because their job requirements require that to be.
Yep.
So I mean, we don't even I'm not even like going down that road where you have to come and you have to lift a certain amount of weight or run 2 miles in a certain amount of time.
Well,
but you will be in better shape doing this once a week or once a month.
Well, I like the way the New York State Police does it is that they allow you to test every year,
Yes.
right? And they give you a certain bonus financially should you pass the test. And what that does is it gives the officer, you know, a reason to train. You know, if you know as a law enforcement officer, you just have to make it through the academy once, and then you can let yourself go completely for the next 20 years, you have no incentive. The New York State Police provides incentive to keep their officers fit, in shape, and top notch.
There should be an annual test.
Annual.
They test firearms, test physical.
Yeah.
It should be every year.
But there should be an annual test, but the individual should also have some intrinsic motivation.
Absolutely.
To remain in good fitness, good shape.
Yeah. If they're
you shouldn't have to be coerced.
If they're being embarrassed once a month at a training, they're going to want to be in better shape.
Oh, then you're going to have the union come down on them.
Yeah, that's a different topic.
If they can't do the arm bar or whatever, what they're supposed to be doing once a month in their training, they're going to want to hit the gym a little bit.
Yep. It was a great podcast, though, and you know why? Because a lot of sensitive topics were touched upon, and you know there's certain things that I am 100% in support of when it comes to law enforcement, and then there's other things that if I was in a position to make different decisions, which I'm not and probably never will be, I could make some adjustments to make, the department even better, than it already is. But I'll probably never be one of those people in a position to, to call shots like that. It's just not where I see my future going. But with that said, though, every student that comes to me that's in law enforcement, not only do I teach them the sports side of jiu-jitsu, I will also teach them, how to control somebody so that, I've taken the gun into consideration, the taser into consideration, the potential of having somebody else around, that could strike you, so I try to make my teaching, as law enforcement specific as I can in class.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that once they know how to do that, they have steps, they have procedure, and they know how to write it up.
Yeah.
Because you always have to write up that incident.
Yeah.
And what are they putting in? They can't put in, well, the assailant didn't comply, so I broke his knee, kicked him in the groin.
Punched him in the throat. Yeah, it's just not going to look good on camera.
No.
It's not going to look good on camera.
No, it's not going to work. So
also be real quick. That's also why I want to touch base when you guys were talking. Everything's on camera now.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. whatever you're doing, everything you do is on camera now.
Yeah.
Not even in law enforcement, not even like
Everything.
You go to Target, you're on the camera. You go to the restaurant, you're on camera. Everywhere, your computer is recording you every second. So like you should behave accordingly.
Oh, absolutely. It's really funny because it reminds me of my wife and I were going out a few years ago. And we're driving down the highway and head on the 80 station, and she's like, "God, you really dug the 80s, didn't you?" And I go, "Yeah, I did." She goes, "Well, why?" I go, "No surveillance cameras."
That's funny. I was watching actually a Motley Crue show last night, like their band breaking up last night. God, I wish I was a part of that band.
Oh man. Well, Kyle, again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It was a great time.
Thank you for having me. We'll sure have you on again for another subject. To you guys out there, thank you very much for listening in and watching this most recent version of Master Phil in Your Corner. Master Phil in Your Corner signing off. Strength and honor.
Thanks, guys.